Have you ever thought that hard work was all it took to succeed? That if you just kept your head down and gave everything you had, life would eventually reward you? In a quiet little village nestled between fields of gold and dusty roads, there lived a teacher named Srimant Babu. His hair had turned grey, and the wrinkles on his face told stories of decades spent teaching, but his spirit, still sharp, still passionate. Every morning he stepped into a worn-out school with broken benches and chalk-stained walls, yet the room lit up with ambition the moment he began to speak. Among his students were two boys who couldn't have been more different, yet were both equally brilliant. Robbie was the embodiment of determination. He studied long hours, pored over books, and believed there was only one road to success, through hard work, no matter how painful. Sujan, on the other hand, believed in something else. Raised by a poor farmer, his life was filled with labor, not luxury. He worked in the fields by day and read under a flickering kerosene lamp by night. He didn't have the time or energy to study like Robbie, but he had something else. He had strategy, he had thoughtfulness. One night, exhausted from a full day in the field, Sujan sat down with his books when his father snapped, "Why do you waste time studying? We're poor. You'll never make it out." But Sujan didn't flinch. His voice was soft, but his words were strong. "If I don't study, we'll stay poor forever." His father sighed, unable to argue with a son whose dreams burned brighter than their dimly lit home. That night, Sujan didn't sleep. He studied, not just with hope, but with a plan. What he didn't know was that his greatest test and his greatest lesson was waiting just beyond the horizon. What Sujan didn't know was that his greatest test and his greatest lesson was waiting just beyond the horizon. The very next day, Srimant Babu stood before the class with a glint in his wise old eyes. "Today," he said, "I have a challenge for you all, but only two will take it." His gaze settled on Robbie and Sujan. "You two have worked hard in your own ways. Now, let's see what you've truly learned." The room fell silent. "I want each of you to climb the mountain behind the village," he continued. "At its peak grows a rare flower. Bring it to me. The first to return will be the winner." The challenge seemed simple. Climb, collect, return. But both boys knew it meant more. This wasn't just a test of speed, it was a test of who they had become. The next morning, Robbie was up before sunrise, tying his shoelaces tight, ready to conquer the mountain. His breath sharp, his mind focused, he took off like a bullet, each step powered by belief in brute effort. Sujan watched from a distance, then turned his eyes to the landscape and began thinking. He didn't run. He paused. He scanned the mountain, and then he did something unexpected. He walked in the opposite direction. Sujan walked in the opposite direction, not away from the challenge, but toward understanding it. While Robbie battled the steep path head-on, every muscle in his body straining with effort, Sujan circled the base of the mountain, searching for a better way. His eyes scanned the rocks, the trees, the shadows of old paths long forgotten. That's when he saw an old man sitting quietly by a stream, chewing on a stick and watching the sky. "Sir," Sujan asked respectfully, "is there another path to the top of the mountain?" The man smiled. "There is a narrow trail behind the ridge. It's longer but easier. Few notice it because they're too busy rushing." Sujan bowed in thanks and set off. It wasn't the shortest route, but it allowed him to save his strength and move with purpose. Meanwhile, Robbie climbed with everything he had. His hands were scraped, shirt soaked in sweat, his breath ragged, but he never stopped. He kept telling himself, the harder the climb, the greater the reward. By the time Robbie reached the summit, his legs trembling, the flower almost slipped from his fingers. But just as he turned to head back down, he froze. Sujan was already coming down, calm, steady, holding the same flower. Sujan was already coming down, calm, steady, holding the same flower. Robbie stood stunned at the peak, clutching his own, breathless and bewildered. How could this be? He had poured everything into the climb, sweat, pain, sheer determination. And yet there was Sujan, who hadn't even rushed, reaching the goal first. Back at the school, both boys stood before Srimant Babu, the rare flowers cradled in their palms. The old teacher looked at them with pride, not because one had won, but because both had learned. "Robbie," he began gently, "you worked hard. That much is clear. But you believed effort alone would bring victory. You never stopped to ask, is there a better way?" Robbie lowered his eyes, the sting of truth, sharper than any rock he'd climbed. Then the teacher turned to Sujan. "You used your mind. You thought before you moved. But remember, if you always search for the easiest way, you might miss the value of effort." Sujan nodded slowly. "I understand, Guruji. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to win wisely." The teacher smiled. "And that's the lesson. Hard work builds strength. Smart work builds direction. Combine both, and you build a future. Combine both, and you build a future." Those words echoed in their minds for years. Robbie and Sujan never forgot that moment, nor the lesson their teacher had planted deep within them. As time passed, their lives took different paths, but both walked forward with a shared understanding. Robbie went on to become a brilliant scientist. He still worked hard, but now he paused, questioned, strategized. His inventions weren't just products of effort, but of insight sharpened by experience. Sujan, on the other hand, became a successful entrepreneur. He built his business not just with clever ideas, but by waking early, grinding daily, and respecting the process as much as the outcome. Years later, both men returned to their village, not as students, but as men shaped by that mountain. They found Srimant Babu sitting quietly under the same old tree where he once taught them. Time had curved his back and softened his voice, but the fire in his eyes remained. They stood before him, smiling. "Guruji," they said together, "your last lesson made us who we are." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. "Because you understood what most never do. True success lives where hard work meets wisdom."